you to think about a contrast. I want you to think about us, and I want you to think about God. That we have fear. God has confidence. We question, but God is the answer, and God gives the answer. We make excuses. God gives assurance. We obey, and yet in our obedience we can fear. Yet God gives strength. We need assurance. God is faithful. We prepare. It is God who gives the victory. We fear, we have anxiety, and yet it is God who conquers. We get tired, but God gives strength. And so, some things to remember is that God can transform our lives. As Christians, we are royalty. We stand, but yet at times we stumble. Comes a time where we're going to die, unless the Lord comes first. And also that apostasy, falling away from God, can happen very quickly. All these things sound current? Well, then it makes the events in the life of Gideon very, very relevant. In the cycle of the history during the Judges, as you read through Judges, you're going to see this cycle over and over and over again. That the people are going to be following God, and then they sin and turn their backs on God, and God gives them over into servitude to another nation. And so then as they are in this servitude, and for several years, many years, then there will come a time of sorrow and supplication as they are pleading to God. And then God delivers, and there is salvation. And then there's a cycle that repeats. Sin, servitude, sorrow and supplication, and salvation. And so if you will, open your Bibles to Judges chapter 6. We're going to be looking, if we have time, from Judges 6 through Judges chapter 8. And we're going to be looking at Gideon, also known as Jerubbaal. And Gideon was the fifth judge of Israel. And in Judges chapter 6, as we come upon Gideon, look at beginning of verse 1. Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the eyes of Yahweh. Legacy Standard Bible. And Yahweh gave them into the hands of Midian 7 years. There you see the sin and the servitude. Well, Gideon, as we jump down to verse 11, then the angel of Yahweh came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to preserve it from the Midianites. Here Gideon was. He was beating out the wheat but not in the open. He's in a wine press. But yet, God has a purpose for Gideon. And as Gideon is like hiding in this wine press, beating out the wheat, hiding from the Midianites, and the angel of Yahweh appeared to him and said, Yahweh is with you, O mighty man of valor. Does he appear to be a mighty man of valor when he's hiding in a wine press from the Midianites? But God has a purpose. Well, Gideon questioned. And let me just interject this, because some things that I have grown in is that I used to think that you don't question God. That He is above us, He is superior to us, He is all-knowing, and it's just not right to question. But you know, as I've grown and as I've looked at some things, it's not sinful to question God. Did Gideon question God? Yes. Did Jeremiah question God? Did Jesus question God? My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Yes, sir.
I think you might be going there in just a minute, but I think the frame of mind that
Yes.
when we question God is what is important.
Yes.
If we're righteous in our question because we don't know the answer, then, it's okay to question God, but if you're doing it disdainfully and disrespectfully,
Right.
that's when you have a problem.
Right.
I was on the same track as Ken. When you take into consideration an actual situation, look back at the first of the birth of Christ. Which I did a little study yesterday on the men's group. You look at John the Baptist's father, and he questioned God's ability to make his wife pregnant. And what happened to him? He got struck with no voice.
Right.
Mary questioned God, could I have a baby as a virgin? And her question was ignited innocent voice of a young woman wondering what was going on. So it gets back to what Ken just said. It depends on the type of question.
Well,
We're trying to answer a situation that's important to us, or do we show doubt in what we're doing?
the statements that have been made is that it depends on the attitude. It depends on whether you are seeking or are you demanding. And the thing is, remember, one of the prophets was saying, Lord, how can this happen? And he said, you wouldn't understand it if I told you, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And the thing is, the problem is about questioning, as these brothers have said. We've got to watch our attitude and our position. We may not understand, and we may have sincere questions, and we're going to see the questions of Gideon. But if we elevate ourselves to a position that we demand God an answer, that's wrong. That's wrong. We are in submission to God. We are subject to God. There can come a time of honest questioning that we don't understand. Well, let's look at Gideon. In Judges chapter 6 and verse 13, then Gideon said to him, "O my Lord, if Yahweh is with us, why then has all this happened to us?" There's question number one. He didn't understand. Here it is, they're in servitude, they're in this difficulty, and why has all this happened to us? And question number two, and where are all his wondrous deeds, which our fathers recounted us, saying, did not Yahweh bring us up from Egypt? And then we see Gideon's conclusion about it. But now Yahweh has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. Well, yes, because of the sinfulness of the Israelites. God had given them into the hand of the Midianites in servitude, but yet Gideon's not understanding. You know, if God is with us, then why is all this stuff happening to us? Where are all the wondrous deeds that our fathers told us about that happened in the past? So God's just abandoned us. God has just given us into the hand of the Midianites, the hand of Midian. So then, look, verse 14. Then Yahweh turned to him and said, go in this strength of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? Again, remember, where's Gideon? He's beating out the wheat in the winepress. He's been called a man of valor. He's being called here this man that has strength and to save Israel. But then Gideon has questions and excuses. With what shall I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the least in Manasseh, and I'm the youngest in my father's house. In other words, my clan, my family, my group is the least in Manasseh, and I'm the least of the least. But Yahweh said to him, surely I will be with you, and you shall strike down the Midian as one man. So, yes.
I was going to say that God sees us as what we can be with his help, not necessarily as what we are.
Yes.
And it's really important to encourage people. You do that with your kids. If you keep it, calling a kid, if you keep it, you're going to believe you.
And
And the Lord, he has told us in the scriptures that we are to encourage one another.
mhm. One of the things that we were pointing out is that we may not realize it, but God does. As Gideon was fearful and he's in the winepress and God is calling him, oh man of valor. He's calling him being strong, and Gideon is making excuses. I'm weak. And so God knows. And so Gideon's offered these excuses, but yet God's commands. Take your father's bull and a second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, and build an altar to Yahweh your God on top of this stronghold in an orderly manner, and take the second bull and offer a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah which you cut down. Judges 6:25 through 26. Baal was the false god of the people. And an Asherah was a pole, a tree or a pole that was built to honor Asherah, this false goddess who they believed that her role was the role of the mother goddess. So now then, God has given Gideon instructions. I want you to go and I want you to tear down the Baal that belonged to who? Who did it belong to? Yeah, his dad. And the Asherah, pull it down. And I want you to take this bull and a second bull that's 7 years old. And by the way, the bulls belong to who? Gideon's dad. And I want you to make an altar out of the wood from this Asherah. I want you to build an altar. I want you to offer those bulls up as a sacrifice. Gideon's obedience, yet fear. So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as Yahweh, as God had spoken to him. And now it happened that because he was too afraid, he obeyed, but there was fear. Too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city to do it by day, he did it by night. Yes, he obeyed. He obeyed. But there was fear. God has said, I'm going to be with you. You're going to strike them down as one man. Mighty man of valor. Go in this strength of yours. I want you to do these things. Gideon does it, but he's fearful. Yes. Okay. Whatever the case, he's not wanting to be caught in this, in being fearful. And then the need for assurance. And so he's wanting these tests. And so he asks, okay, let there be dew on the fleece, but the ground be dry. And when he got up, in fact, if you notice in the account, there's so much moisture in it, he's able to wring it out into a bowl. Well, he still wants assurance. Now, it's been given here, but the need for assurance. And so we ask, okay, this time, let there be dew on the ground, but the fleece be dry. And sure enough, God caused that to happen. It's kind of small, but as Gideon is convinced then, and so he is going to go battle Midian, and he gets 32,000 men to go into battle. And God said, Gideon, that's too many. You remember the reason God said that's too many? Exactly. If you're victorious with these 32,000, they're going to think, hey, they got the victory. The victory and the praise needs to go to God. And so he said, you tell whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return home. Let him depart from Mount Gilead. 22,000 returned home. Okay, 32,000 minus 22,000 leaves 10,000, right? So 10,000 remain. And God said, that's still too many. And so what I want you to do is take them down to the water and separate those who lap like a dog and then those that kneel down and drink from the water. And there were 300 that lapped like the dog, and that means 9,700 knelt down to drink. And God said, I'll use the 300, to paraphrase it. Gideon's fear, but this is something interesting, I think. If you go to Judges chapter 7, look at verse 10 and then 11 or 12 or so. But if you are afraid, remember that. But if you are afraid, then both you and Purah, your young man, your servant, go down to the camp. And you will hear what they say, and afterward your hands will be strengthened that you may go down against the camp. If you're afraid, go with who? Yeah, with the servant, with Purah. If you're afraid, take Purah, go to the camp. You're going to hear what's being said. You're going to be strengthened. If you're afraid, take Purah. So he went with Purah, his young man, down to the outskirts of the armed men that were in the camp. Again, we see the fear of Gideon. If you're afraid, take Purah. And so he went down with Purah. You'll hear what they say, and afterwards your hands will be strengthened. Judges 7, verse 11. And so, sure enough, Gideon heard what was being said, heard them talking about this dream, and it meaning, well, Midian's going to be overthrown. He was strengthened. But then I think it's interesting to notice what he did after that. That Gideon worshiped. He heard, he was strengthened, and then he worshiped. And that's Judges 7, verses 13 through 15. So Gideon takes the 300, and they divide up into 3 companies. In Judges chapter 7, tell you what, let's pick it up in verse 19 and verse 20. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him, remember, because he's divided them up into 3 groups, so there's 100 with him, came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just set up the watch, and they blew the trumpets and smashed the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. Now watch. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing, and called out, a sword for Yahweh and for Gideon. The sword of the Lord and for Gideon. They've got torches in their left hand, and they've got trumpets in their right hand. Where's their sword? Their hands are occupied. It was God who gave the victory. It was God who gave the victory. So they blew 300 trumpets, and Yahweh set the sword of one against another, even throughout the whole camp. And the camp fled as far as Bethsheba, towards Zerah, as far as the edge of Abel-Meholah by Tabbath. And so God is causing that confusion, and they're fighting against one another. the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. In chapter 8, there's an interesting statement in verse 4. Because Gideon and this 300, they're pursuing the Midianites. And verse 4, then Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan and crossed over, weary, yet pursuing. The New King James mentions exhausted, but still in pursuit. They were tired, but they kept on. I want you to think about in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9, encouragement to us. As the Apostle Paul said, and let's not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we'll reap if we do not grow weary. Yeah, we get physically tired. We get physically tired. We may even get exhausted. Let's not get spiritually tired. Let's not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we'll reap if we do not grow weary. So, remember the fear of Gideon hiding in the winepress, beating out the wheat. Remember the fear of Gideon in questioning. Remember the fear of Gideon. If you're afraid, take Purah, your servant, and he takes Purah, his servant. But now then, I want you to notice his boldness, his courage, the transformation that takes place in his life. Because when we get over to Judges chapter 8, watch verses 7 through 9. And Gideon said, thus, when Yahweh has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will thrash your bodies with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. Does that sound like a scared man? No. There's been a transformation in his life. Let's go on. So he went up from there to Penuel and spoke similarly to them. And the men of Penuel answered him, just as the men of Succoth had answered. So he spoke also to the men of Penuel, saying, when I return safely, I will tear down this tower. When he was supposed to tear down the altar, the Baal and the Asherah, because he was afraid, he did it by night. Here he's given advance notice. When I get back, I'm going to tear this tower down. When I get back, I'm going to whip you. I'm going to thrash your bodies with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. The boldness, the courage that Gideon exhibits, the transformation that's taken place. There's another interesting statement in Judges chapter 8. Let's begin in verse 16. Then he took the elders of the city as well as thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth a lesson. And he tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, what kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor? And they said, they were like you, each one resembling the son of a king. Resembling the son of a king. I want us to realize, as Christians, we're royalty. You are a royal priesthood. I think it's interesting. Resembling the son of a king. How's our resemblance? Are we living in light and demonstration of royalty, belonging to God? And so Gideon kills Zebah and Zalmunna. However, the thing is, Gideon had commanded his son to kill him, but the son was fearful about doing it because he was just a youth, it says. And so these kings were saying, look, kill us yourself. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise up yourself and smite us, for as the man, so is his might. So Gideon rose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna and took the crescent ornaments which were on their camels' necks. Judges 8, verse 20. I want us to notice Gideon's stance for God, but yet the snare that he fell into. Because in Judges chapter 8, verses 22 and following, then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son, and also your son's son, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. Notice Gideon's stance for God. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. Yahweh, God, shall rule over you. Yet Gideon said to them, I would make one request of you, that each of you give me an earring from a spoil, for they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. Remember who they've taken the ornaments from the camels. And they said, we'll surely give them. So they spread out a garment, and every one of them threw an earring there from his spoil, and the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the neckbands that were on their camels' necks. Watch what Gideon does and the snare. Then Gideon made it into an ephod. A lot of times we think about the ephod being, like something the priest would wear. Well, it can also be an image. And so in this sense, it's an image that Gideon makes. Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in his city, Ophrah. And all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads anymore, and the land was quiet for 40 years in the days of Gideon. He took a stance for God. I'm not going to rule over you. My son's not going to rule over you. My son's son's not going to rule over you. God is going to rule over you. He's going to rule over us. But then he said, but I'm going to make this one request. If you'll give me an earring from the spoil. And so they're bringing all this stuff and they're putting it on this garment, and then Gideon makes this image and placed it in his city. And it became a snare to Gideon, to his household, and to all Israel. They played the harlot with it there. In other words, they are forgetting God, and they're worshiping this image. So it became a snare to Gideon and his household. Well, as we come on down, Gideon lived to a good old age, it says. Then Gideon in Judges 8, verse 32. Is this Sharon? Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. No. She was saying that when we have a great victory, I'm repeating because the people online cannot hear the comments from the crowd. That she was saying that when we have a great victory, that we need to be on guard, not be prideful, because pride comes before the fall. So very quickly to wrap this up, maybe we will get through. Then Gideon the son of Joash died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites, Judges 8, verse 32. Apostasy, falling away. Then it happened, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the sons of Israel turned back and played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. Thus the sons of Israel did not remember Yahweh their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show loving kindness to the household of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in accord with all the good that he had done to Israel. Judges 8, 34 through 35. I want you to notice, as soon as Gideon was dead, they forgot God. And they played the harlot with the Baals and the Baal-berith. And they're making him their God. Yes, Sharon? Mm-hmm. All right. That's right. That's right. I tried to do a little bit of math here and thinking, how soon was this? And when you think about the children of Israel, that they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Othniel, first judge, reigned or judged like 40 years. Ehud, 80 years. Not sure about Shamgar. Deborah, 40. Gideon, 40. And that totals up the years that we know, 240 years. 240 years. And in that 240 years, they've forgotten God. Let me ask a question. Anybody ever heard of Abraham Lincoln? Raise your hand if you heard of Abraham Lincoln. Do you know that 240 years, roughly 200 years from 2023, takes us back to 1823? Abraham Lincoln was born in 1809. Yet we remember Abraham Lincoln. But in about that same amount of time, people had forgotten God. I also looked that, when you stop, or something crossed my mind, you realize that we are farther this side from Abraham Lincoln than Abraham Lincoln was from the Revolutionary War. That kind of puts things in perspective about how quickly time goes, doesn't it? In my lifetime, there are now 46 presidents. During my lifetime, I've lived during 13 of them. That is over 1/4 of the presidents that I've lived through in my lifetime. When I was born, Eisenhower was president. The thing is that we remember things during that time, but in a time of relatively about the time of Abraham Lincoln, from that time, they've apostatized and don't even know God. The warnings for us and how applicable and relevant we see in the life of Gideon. Thank you for your attendance.